Our scripture lesson this morning comes from the first part of the gospel, the good news according to Luke. Luke chapter 24 focuses on the events of early Easter morning. Listen now to Luke's account. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they, the women, came to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly two men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. But remember how he told you, while he was still in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified, and on the third day rise again." Then they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves. Then he went home, amazed at what had happened. May the Lord add his blessing to the reading and hearing of his word. And all God's people said, Amen. Amen. Well, in recent history, there have been many reports of the deaths of people who were still very much alive. 1897, there were rumors of humorist Mark Twain's death. And while commenting on the rumors, Twain quipped, "The report of my death was an exaggeration." Well, he died once again in 1907 when the New York Times published an article speculating that Twain had died at sea. Mark Twain actually died 3 years after that report. And there have been other famous people who literally died before their time. Some people will remember this. Paul McCartney of the Beatles, right? 1969, there were people who claimed that he had died 3 years earlier in 1966. That one turned out to be a big hoax. Social media seems to have accelerated this sharing of the ultimate fake news, reporting the deaths of people who are still very much alive. Among them, Barack Obama, Cher, Bill Nye the Science Guy, and so the list goes on. Last year, the actor who has been portraying in recent years Superman, Henry Cavill, found out on Wikipedia that he had been dead for 2 days. It's crazy. It's crazy. But it happens. On Friday of Holy Week, Good Friday, the acquaintances of Jesus, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, watched Jesus die. A righteous man named Joseph of Arimathea took the body of Jesus off the cross, wrapped it in a linen cloth, and laid it in a tomb. The women, these same women, they saw the tomb, they saw how the body was laid there, and they returned home to prepare spices and ointments to put on the body. And then they rested, since it was the Sabbath, sundown Friday through Saturday night. Was Jesus really dead? Oh yeah. Oh yeah, there's no doubt about it. Jesus died on a cross, and then he was placed in a tomb, and he was dead. Jesus had not fainted on the cross. He was not in some sort of suspended animation in the tomb. He was so dead that the soldiers who were about to break his legs to hasten his death decided not to waste their time on a man who was already dead. And remember, the people of Jesus' day lived much closer to death than we do. Few people died in the Palestine hospital. Right? I mean, people died at home or wherever they were. So people knew what death was. Jesus' death was not just a rumor. This was not fake news. Jesus was quite dead. his body wrapped in a linen cloth and laid in a tomb. Jesus was dead. On Easter morning, at early dawn, the women walked to the tomb with the spices that they had prepared. And they were expecting death, not life. They were expecting death. When they arrived to anoint the body, they found the stone rolled away from the tomb. They went in and, unable to find the body, were perplexed. Their working hypothesis was that Jesus was dead. It did not occur to them that he might be alive. It was not even in their mind a remote possibility. Because they'd been there at every point of the story, remember? They'd been there at the crucifixion. They'd been there when Joseph of Arimathea got permission to take the body off the cross. They were there when the body was placed in the tomb. But at the empty tomb, as we've read, two men in dazzling clothes suddenly appeared. And the women were terrified, understandably so. While the men said, "Well, why do you look for the living among the dead? He's not here, but has risen." Was Jesus dead now? Well, according to the men, no. He is not here, but has risen. Now the women were unable to absorb this news immediately. So they say to the women, the men do, "Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified, and on the third day rise again." And I imagine they're ticking off the days in their mind. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the third day. And they began to recall Jesus' words. They began to put together how both death and resurrection were part of the plan that Jesus had laid out for them. The raising of Jesus suddenly seemed, well, logical. And indeed, the body was not there. The tomb was empty. So the women returned from the tomb, and they told this to the 11 disciples, as well as to the rest of the followers of Jesus. And it's significant at this point that Luke, the chronicler, the one who's writing this account, takes the time to name the women. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. Luke is saying, hey, this is eyewitness testimony. It's eyewitness testimony by women who were known to the community and trustworthy. These words were much more believable than the celebrity rumors that swirl around on the internet with no eyewitnesses and no evidence to support them. But in spite of their testimonies, the women were unable to convince their friends. Their words seemed to be, to the apostles anyway, an idle tale. And most of the men believed them not at all. Except for Peter. Peter gets up and he runs. He runs to the tomb to see the evidence for himself. And then he went home, amazed at what had happened. That is, Jesus' body was no longer in the tomb. And that's where I stopped the reading this morning. And you may think it unusual to stop there, because as you read on in the gospel account and in the other gospels as well, Jesus appears to the people who knew him and loved him. So why stop here this morning? Well, often in our lives, we are experiencing a death of sorts, and we haven't yet experienced the life that follows. Now, sadly, we often frame our lives around death instead of life. So often, we look for death instead of life. People are naturally drawn, it seems, to stories of bloodshed and disaster and death. This is captured by the well-known maxim in the news business: if it bleeds, it leads. Right? I mean, this is what attracts eyeballs, is the bad news. But one of the signs of the resurrection is focus on life rather than death, which the women show when they take the message of the empty tomb to the disciples. Now, many of you will recognize this man. This is Mr. Rogers of It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Fame, right? Mr. Rogers, you may not know this about him, he was a Presbyterian minister. And he kept his focus on the living, not on the dead, especially in situations of tragedy and suffering. And it's amazing, in the show, he doesn't skirt difficult issues, when talking to children through television. He dealt with a lot of troubling social issues of the days in which the show was on. And he also dealt with tragedy and with suffering. One insight that Fred Rogers had was from his own mother during his childhood. And he was disturbed when he would see scary things on the news. And his mother always said to him, "Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping." And to this day, Mr. Rogers said, especially in times of disaster, I remember my mother's words, and I'm always comforted by realizing that there are still so many helpers, so many caring people in this world. As a believer in the resurrection, Fred Rogers focused on life instead of death. I find that when I am anxious about something, I find that I imagine all the bad ways that the situation could play out. Does anybody do this? Is it just me? We're anxious about something. We think about all the bad ways this thing could go. But we never think about the possibility that something good and unexpected might happen. We never think about the possibility that God might show up in some unexpected way, or that God might send people to be there for us and with us, stepping in to help. When we do this, we're framing our life around death instead of life. But God is in the business of redeeming death, of bringing life out of death. You may not know this name, although some of you will know the musical group that he is the lead singer of, Bart Millard. Bart Millard is the lead singer of the contemporary Christian music group Mercy Me. After Bart's father died, he wrote a song called I Can Only Imagine, which is a very popular song and explores what life in heaven might be like. What the song does not reveal, however, is what a jerk Bart's father was. For years, Arthur Millard beat his boy sometimes 3 or 4 times a week. And Bart grew to hate his father, and the two became distant. At one point, Arthur became a Christian, and then he developed terminal cancer. Bart decided to give his father a second chance at a relationship. Bart said, "My dad was a monster, and I saw God transform him." Now, the story was painful, and it took a terminal illness to bring the two together. But the end of the story is resurrection, including the reconciliation of a father and a son, and the creation of a Christian song that has given hope and inspiration to millions of people. So let's stop looking for death instead of life. Let's follow Jesus as we seek to understand our own experiences of death and life. The best way to speak about the resurrection is not Jesus rose from the dead as though it was a self-generated miracle, but it's far better to say Jesus was raised from the dead. And the early texts support this. Jesus was raised from the dead. And it's good for us to understand that death is not just physical dying, but going to the full depth of things, actually hitting the bottom, beyond where you are in control. This is the kind of death where you learn that your daughter has cancer and the prognosis is poor, or your son gets arrested, or your spouse wants out of the marriage, or you're facing bankruptcy, or you're facing addiction. These deaths to the small self are tipping points. They are opportunities to choose transformation. And unfortunately, the vast majority of people turn bitter, and they look for someone to blame. So their death is indeed death for them, because they close down to growth and to new life. But if you choose to walk through the depths, even the depths of your own sin and your own mistakes, if you choose to walk to the depth, you will come out on the other side, and you will know that you have been taken there by a source, capital S, larger than yourself. Walking through the depths and coming out on the other side, surely this too is salvation. And you know, if you're looking for miracles, I think the most miraculous thing is that God uses the very thing that would normally destroy you as a means to transform and enlighten you.